5:17 CAM. Okinawa, Japan. The southernmost of the main Japanese home islands, stretched like a narrow green blade across the East China Sea, 110 miles from the Chinese coast at its nearest point. Pre-dawn. The air warm and humid even at this hour, thick with the subtropical moisture that never fully left this part of the Pacific, regardless of the season. The sky to the east was showing the first pale gray suggestion of morning. In the streets of Naha, the city was beginning to stir. The first fishing boats were clearing the harbor mouth. The convenience stores had been open all night. At Kadena Air Base, the largest United States Air Force installation in the Pacific, occupying a significant portion of Okinawa's central plateau, home to the 18th Wing and its complement of F-15Cs, F-35As, E-3 Sentries, KC-135 tankers, and the full supporting infrastructure of America's most critical forward airbase in East Asia. The early shift was on duty. Aircraft in maintenance bays, fuel trucks making their pre-dawn rounds. The radar operators in the Air Operations Center watching the normal pre-dawn commercial traffic pattern across the East China Sea. What none of them knew, what no publicly available intelligence assessment had yet confirmed with the level of certainty that would have triggered a base-wide alert, was that 340 miles to the southwest, on a feature that appeared on Chinese government maps as a marine research installation, and on commercial satellite imagery as a cluster of unremarkable low concrete structures built over an expanded reef platform. Something had been operational for the previous 11 weeks that had no business being in the middle of the East China Sea. Meiji Reef, one of the disputed features of the South China Sea's northern approaches, claimed by China, the Philippines, and Vietnam, occupied since 1995 by a Chinese military presence that had grown from a small weather observation station to a substantial constructed platform over 3 decades of incremental expansion. The platform had, in its latest construction phase, acquired features that the NRO's imagery analysts had flagged with escalating concern over the previous 18 months. A hardened underground facility with a blast door profile consistent with weapon storage, a launcher erection structure that had been partially concealed beneath an extended roof structure, and a power generation capacity far in excess of anything a weather station or fisheries management facility would require. The intelligence assessment had reached probable for a hypersonic missile deployment 11 days earlier. It had not yet reached high confidence. The difference between probable and high confidence had been the reason the alert level at Kadena had been elevated to Force Protection Condition Bravo rather than Charlie. It had not been enough. At 5:17 a.m., from the hardened underground facility on Meiji Reef, the People's Liberation Army Rocket Force launched 4 DF-17 hypersonic glide vehicles. The DF-17 was China's operational hypersonic weapon, a boost glide system that rode a ballistic missile booster to high altitude, then separated and descended on a semi-ballistic trajectory at speeds exceeding Mach 5, maneuvering unpredictably in its terminal phase in ways that made conventional ballistic missile defense intercept geometries unreliable. Each DF-17 carried a conventional penetrating warhead of approximately 500 kilograms. Their assigned targets: Kadena's main runway intersection, the primary fuel storage complex, the Air Operations Center building, and the hardened aircraft shelter complex housing the 18th Wing's F-35A fleet. The flight time from Meiji Reef to Kadena at DF-17 cruise velocity, approximately 7 minutes and 40 seconds. The warning time generated by the space-based infrared system detection of the DF-17 boost phase, 4 minutes and 12 seconds. 4 minutes and 12 seconds of warning against a maneuvering hypersonic glide vehicle, arriving at Mach 5+. In Beijing, the Central Military Commission had made the decision to strike Kadena 72 hours earlier at a session attended by the chairman and the commanders of the PLA Rocket Force, the Eastern Theater Command, and the PLA Air Force. The strategic rationale was stark and had been building for months. The F-35As at Kadena represented the most significant threat to PLA air operations over Taiwan in any near-term conflict scenario. The E-3 Sentries provided the battle management capability that would allow the US and Japanese air forces to fight effectively despite numerical disadvantage. The KC-135 tankers extended every American combat aircraft's reach and endurance to ranges that made the entire Western Pacific an American operational space. Kadena was not one asset. It was the enabling infrastructure for American air power across the entire theater. Render it inoperable for even 48 to 72 hours, and the window for PLA operations across the Taiwan Strait opened to a width that the CMC's operational planners had calculated as sufficient. The Meiji Reef installation had been the key. A DF-17 launch platform 340 miles from Kadena, unknown to American and Japanese forces at confirmed high confidence, provided an attack vector that bypassed the conventional ballistic missile defense architecture oriented against longer-range threats from the Chinese mainland. The warning time of 4 minutes was the CMC had assessed insufficient for meaningful defensive response. The DF-17's maneuvering terminal phase was, the CMC had assessed, beyond the engagement capability of the Patriot PAC-3 batteries at Kadena. The attack would succeed. Kadena would burn. The window would open. They had made 5 catastrophic mistakes. The first mistake: they believed the Meiji Reef installation had been assessed at only probable by American intelligence, and that high-confidence confirmation was 11 days away. They were correct about the probable assessment. They were catastrophically wrong about what probable meant in terms of operational response, because Pacific Air Forces had not waited for high confidence to pre-position response assets. 48 hours after the probable assessment was issued, 3 additional F-35As had been quietly repositioned from Misawa to an auxiliary field on Miyakojima, 120 miles southwest of Okinawa, specifically to provide a survivable strike package against Meiji Reef if the intelligence assessment hardened. They were already there. They were already loaded. Their pilots were already briefed on the Meiji Reef target package. The second mistake: the DF-17 flight profile at Mach 5+, was designed to defeat the PAC-3 MSE engagement envelope by arriving too fast and too unpredictably for the PAC-3's terminal guidance to generate a reliable intercept. This assessment was accurate for a single-layer PAC-3 defense. It did not account for the terminal high-altitude area defense battery that had been relocated from Andersen Air Force Base on Guam to a classified position on the northern tip of Okinawa 14 days earlier. A relocation conducted at night under heavy concealment, specifically in response to the probable Meiji Reef assessment. THAAD engaged hypersonic threats in the upper atmosphere, above the altitude band where the DF-17's maneuvering capability was most effective. The geometry of a THAAD engagement against a hypersonic glide vehicle from the upper atmosphere was fundamentally different from a PAC-3 engagement in the terminal phase. The CMC's target planners had assessed Kadena's air defenses from a database that did not include the classified THAAD relocation. The third mistake: they launched 4 DF-17s. The number had been selected as sufficient to ensure at least 2 warheads reached their targets, even accounting for a 15% single-shot probability of intercept that the PLA Rocket Force's assessment assigned to PAC-3 against DF-17. 4 missiles multiplied by an 85% penetration probability produced an expected 3 warheads reaching targets, enough to achieve the mission. The calculation did not account for THAAD's engagement probability against hypersonic glide vehicles in the upper atmospheric phase, which the classified assessment assigned at 62 to 71% per shot with a 2-shot engagement doctrine. 2 THAAD interceptors per target, 4 DF-17s, 8 THAAD interceptors in the firing sequence. The fourth mistake: the Meiji Reef installation had been constructed and supplied using a logistics chain that ran through the South Sea Fleet's Zhangjiang base, through a series of civilian fishing and construction support vessels to the Reef platform. That logistics chain, which the CMC had assessed as sufficiently obscured by civilian cover to be unactionable under normal rules of engagement, had been under continuous surveillance not for 11 days but for 4 months. The NSA's collection against the Meiji Reef construction project's communications had been running since the first anomalous power consumption readings were detected. The installation's layout, its weapons storage capacity, its crew complement, its resupply schedule, and the specific tunnel dimensions consistent with DF-17 launcher storage had all been mapped in exhaustive detail. The Meiji Reef strike package had existed as a pre-planned, pre-coordinated operation for 6 weeks. It was waiting for the trigger, the fifth mistake, the one that transformed a tactical strike on Kadena into a comprehensive neutralization of the PLA Rocket Force's Western Pacific hypersonic strike capability, was the assumption that the response would be calibrated and proportional. That the United States, following an attack on a forward airbase that produced runway damage and infrastructure disruption rather than mass casualties, would respond in kind, striking back at the specific launcher that had fired, creating a tit-for-tat exchange that Beijing could manage diplomatically. That assumption was drawn from every prior crisis in the US-China relationship, in which American responses had been proportional, measured, and designed to de-escalate rather than to impose decisive costs. What the CMC had not read, because it was a classified document that had never been publicly acknowledged, was the Pacific Air Force's classified hypersonic strike response framework, approved 14 months earlier, which defined any PLA hypersonic attack on a U.S. forward base as triggering a comprehensive counterforce response against the PLA Rocket Force's entire Western Pacific hypersonic launch infrastructure. Not just the launcher that fired. All of them. What happened in the next 62 minutes was the most comprehensive, single-day degradation of an adversary's hypersonic strike capability ever executed. At 5:17 a.m. and 14 seconds, the SBIRS satellite detected the DF-17 boost phase signatures over Meiji Reef. The alert reached Kadena's Air Operations Center at 5:17 a.m. and 21 seconds, 7 seconds from detection to warning. The base emergency alert system activated at 5:17 a.m. and 28 seconds, broadcasting the inbound missile warning across every speaker on the installation. 11 seconds of warning before the THAAD battery received its engagement authorization. The THAAD battery on northern Okinawa had been tracking the SBIR's Q and computing engagement solutions since 5:17 a.m. and 22 seconds. At 5:17 a.m. and 39 seconds, 18 seconds after detection, the first THAAD interceptor launched. The second followed 4 seconds later. The third and fourth at 4-second intervals. 8 THAAD interceptors in the air within 34 seconds of detection, 2 assigned per DF-17 track. The engagement sequencing handled automatically by the battery's fire control system. The DF-17 glide vehicles were in their cruise phase at 90 to 100 kilometers altitude when the THAAD interceptors reached their engagement altitudes. At this altitude band, the DF-17's lateral maneuvering capability was constrained by atmospheric density. The same thin atmosphere that allowed the hypersonic glide to maintain Mach 5+ velocity also limited the aerodynamic control authority available for terminal evasion. The THAAD interceptors, which used hit-to-kill kinetic energy rather than proximity detonation, had a closing velocity solution that the engagement computers had computed with a confidence interval of plus or minus 6 meters. DF-17, Track 1, 2 THAAD interceptors. First interceptor, miss by 11 meters, insufficient for kinetic kill. Second interceptor, direct hit. Track 1 eliminated at 5:22 a.m. DF-17, Track 2, 2 THAAD interceptors. First interceptor, direct hit. Track 2 eliminated at 5:23 a.m. and 12 seconds. Second interceptor safety destruct. DF-17, Track 3, 2 THAAD interceptors. First interceptor, direct hit. Track 3 eliminated at 5:23 a.m. and 31 seconds. DF-17, Track 4. First interceptor, miss by 22 meters. Second interceptor, direct hit at 5:24 a.m. and 4 seconds. Track 4 eliminated. 4 DF-17 hypersonic glide vehicles launched. 4 intercepted by THAAD at altitude. 0 reached Okinawa airspace. 0 impacted Kadena Air Base. At 5:24 a.m. and 11 seconds, 7 minutes and 50 seconds after the launch detection, the all-clear was issued at Kadena. Personnel who had taken cover returned to their stations. The aircraft in the hardened shelters were undamaged. The runway was intact. The fuel complex was intact. The Air Operations Center was operational. At 5:24 a.m. and 30 seconds, Pacific Air Forces transmitted the execute order for the Hypersonic Strike Response Framework. The 3 F-35, as pre-positioned at the Miyako-jima Auxiliary Field, were airborne by 5:27 a.m., carrying JASSMER cruise missiles targeted at the Meiji Reef hardened launcher facility, the platform's power generation complex, and the ammunition and propellant storage structure. Their flight time to Meiji Reef, 22 minutes at dash speed. At the same moment, from Andersen Air Force Base on Guam, 2 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers that had been on alert since the probable Meiji Reef assessment, preloaded with the full target package for the PLA Rocket Force's hypersonic weapon infrastructure, were airborne by 5:31 a.m. Their targets were not on Meiji Reef. Their targets were the 3 confirmed PLA Rocket Force DF-17 brigade deployment sites on the Chinese mainland that the NRO had assessed as the primary source of the Meiji Reef launcher's initial weapon load and the logistics infrastructure supporting its resupply. Site Alpha in Fujian Province, a hardened underground facility, assessed as housing 16 to 24 DF-17 rounds in ready storage. Site Bravo in Guangdong Province, the DF-17 Brigade's primary maintenance and assembly facility. Site Charlie in Jiangxi Province, the PLA Rocket Force's Hypersonic Weapon Logistics Coordination Center for the Eastern Theater. Each B-2 carried 8 GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator weapons, the 30,000-pound bunker-busting bomb capable of penetrating 60 meters of reinforced concrete. Sites Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie had been constructed to survive conventional aerial bombardment. They had not been constructed to survive the GBU-57. The penetration depth required to reach their operational levels had been calculated by NRO analysts from the construction imagery, assessed at between 31 and 47 meters, well within the GBU-57's performance envelope. From USS Michigan, operating at depth in the Philippine Sea, 20 Tomahawk Block 5 cruise missiles launched at 5:33 a.m. Their targets: the Meiji Reef platform's radar and communications infrastructure, specifically the over-the-horizon targeting radar that had been providing the DF-17 launchers with terminal guidance updates, and the 2 planned logistics vessels currently anchored 2 miles from the reef that had been assessed as carrying the reload stock for the DF-17 launchers. Striking the reload vessels before they could offload would deny the Meiji Reef installation any second strike capability, regardless of what survived the F-35A JASSMER strikes on the launch infrastructure. The F-35 has reached Meiji Reef at 5:49 a.m. The Reef platform's HQ 16-point defense missile system, the only air defense asset the installation possessed, activated at 5:47 a.m. and achieved radar lock on one of the 3 approaching F-35As at a range of 31 kilometers. The radar lock lasted 6 seconds before the F-35A's electronic warfare suite overwhelmed the HQ-16's fire control radar with coordinated jamming. The HQ-16 fired 1 missile. It lost guidance lock at 4 kilometers and impacted the sea. The JASSMERs were already in their terminal approach. 12 JASSMers arrived over Meiji Reef between 5:49 a.m. and 5:52 a.m. The hardened launcher facility, the underground structure whose blast door profile had first attracted NSRO attention 18 months earlier, was struck by 4 JASSMERs, using the penetrating warhead variant. Their sequential impacts following the delayed fuse pattern designed to reach maximum depth before detonation. The launch tunnel structure collapsed. The remaining DF-17 rounds stored inside, assessed at between 2 and 4 weapons, were consumed in the secondary detonation of their propellant. The power generation complex was struck by 4 JASSMERs simultaneously, the facility's diesel generator hall and fuel storage tank collapsing in a combined detonation. The propellant and ammunition storage structure received 4 JASSMERs in a strike that produced a secondary explosion visible to the F-35A crews at 40 miles. At 5:51 a.m., the 12 Tomahawks assigned to the Reef communications infrastructure began arriving. The over-the-horizon radar installation was struck and rendered permanently inoperable. The 2 planned logistics vessels anchored to the Reef's southwest were struck by 6 Tomahawks between them, 3 per vessel, and assessed as having sustained catastrophic structural damage, inconsistent with continued operational capability. Both vessels were removed from the battle space. The reload stock they carried was no longer accessible to any surviving element of the Meiji Reef garrison. The Meiji Reef BADF-17 installation was rendered comprehensively inoperable by 5:54 a.m., 37 minutes after the launch. The B-2 Spirits arrived over mainland targets at 7:19 a.m. Site Alpha in Fujian Province received 8 GBU-57 penetrators in sequential paired strikes. The underground facility housing 16 to 24 DF-17 rounds sustained structural collapse. Secondary propellant detonation assessed as catastrophic. Total loss of stored weapons. Site Bravo in Guangdong Province. The DF-17 assembly and maintenance facility was struck by 8 GBU-57s collapsing the assembly hall, propellant loading facility, and component storage complex. 18 to 24 months minimum reconstruction. Site Charlie in Jiangxi Province, the Logistics Coordination Center, collapsed to its operational floor level. Communications infrastructure and systems assessed as comprehensive losses based on SIGINT intercepts of PLA Rocket Force emergency communications. By 7:31 a.m., 2 hours and 14 minutes after the first DF-17 launch, the Hypersonic Strike Response Framework was complete. Final accounting: 4 DF-17s launched, 4 intercepted by THAAD, 0 reaching Kadena, 0 damage to the base. Meiji Reef. Launcher facility inoperable. Reload vessels removed from the battle space. Radar permanently inoperable. Platform neutralized. PLA Rocket Force sites, Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie, all permanently inoperable. Eastern Theater DF-17 brigade capability, assessed as degraded 68 to 74%. American aircraft lost 0. B-2S returned to Anderson by 11:30 a.m. F-35s recovered at Miyako-jima by 7 a.m. USS Michigan undamaged. American casualties 0. The 4,800 personnel at Kadena had spent 8 minutes in covered positions. They returned to their stations at 5:25 a.m. In Beijing, the Central Military Commission convened an emergency session at 7 a.m. local time, before the B-2 strikes on the mainland sites had even been completed. The session had begun in response to the Meiji Reef failure. It continued through the reports of the Fujian, Guangdong, and Jiangxi strikes arriving in sequence between 7:20 and 7:35 a.m. The PLA Rocket Force commander provided a damage assessment in which every number was worse than the one before it. The installation that had taken 3 years to build and 11 weeks to make operational. Inoperable. The stored weapons. Lost. The assembly facility. Collapsed. The logistics center gone. The Meiji Reef installation had been their masterstroke. A hypersonic strike capability inside the first island chain. Undetected at confirmed high confidence. 4 minutes of warning. Too short for effective defense. Operational for 11 weeks. 4 weapons fired. 4 intercepted. Now rubble on a reef. Kadena's runway was open. Its aircraft were flying. The 18th wing schedule delayed by 87 minutes. This is what happens when you spend 3 years building a secret hypersonic platform and calculate that 4 minutes of warning is insufficient for defense. without knowing that THAAD had been repositioned 11 days before you fired. This is what happens when you fire Mach 5 glide vehicles at an airbase and discover the defense architecture you assessed as inadequate had been precisely upgraded in the exact window between your probable and high-confidence assessments. The runway is open. The aircraft are flying. It always will be.